He was a father, a friend, a mentor, a teacher.
You know, he was definitely one of my very best friends. You know, what most people don't know about him is that he was a very fun-loving person, very humorous. We used to, you know, play pranks on each other, and it was just, whenever we were together, it was just a laugh and a blast.
My dad was a tough disciplinarian, and part of it is also that I was a good girl. And my brothers, the ones right after me, were rascals. So they got a lot of discipline, but we all agreed at his 75th birthday that his tough hand was good for us because we all turned out okay.
He called me his personal assistant and the chief of staff for the family. So, you know, we were close. Anybody who had any form of relationship with my dad who learned something, you know, gained something from him. And it was evident when he passed, you know, so many people I didn't even know came up to me and were telling me stories of things they learned from him, you know, how close they were affected by what happened and everything. So he touched a lot of lives.
So I actually love This Earth, My Brother so much that I have an epigraph from the novel at the beginning of my own novel. So he was a huge influence in my life, even though he was absent physically for me or in my memory until I met him again in Nairobi.
The one thing that he always made sure we did, after any new experience, we had to write a book report. We had to write a report, an essay on what we did and the experience. And, you know, so me being, and he would mark it just, you know, as, you know, I'm 9 years old and he was marking my essays as like I was a university student. But it's definitely helped shaped who I've become now, because it's made me a good, very, very good writer.
When you start to face life, let me put it that way, you know, then you kind of appreciate the people around you, you know. You kind of understand what each person is worth, you know. It was literally from that point on, I started getting an understanding of who my father was. It was later in the years when I started, you know, assisting him, then I started to gain a deeper understanding of the kind of person my father was.
My father was a very plain and open book type of person. You know, you didn't, what you saw was what you got, and he was very direct. He spoke his mind. And so I guess with anybody there is probably a very private side to each and every one of us, which none of us know, but all of us suspect.
Yeah, secondary school I actually did literature. So I studied the Cathedral, the journal one, and then I did literature as an elective course, so I studied other poems from other writers as well. Funny enough, in secondary school I kind of understood the poems, but I never really read my dad's book or his works, simply because I didn't understand it. I just thought, this might be complicated. But, you know, later on, especially now, as soon as he passed, I went back, I've been reading his books, and I kind of easily get a clear-cut visual understanding of what he's saying now. It's almost as if he's talking to my ear. You know, it's weird, but, you know, a lot of things have dawned on me now, and I really wish he was still around, because now I have so many things to ask him.
He believed in tradition, very steeped in tradition, and, you know, as you know, none of my siblings have English names. We all have Ghanaian names, traditional names. So he was a traditionalist, and from that perspective. But at the same time, he's very forward-thinking in terms that, you know, education was very paramount, and he made sure that he instilled those values in us as well. So
his love for Ghana started with his love for the Anglo people, the Anglo culture, and he was an icon of that culture. And it's I suppose not only as a statesman but also as a cultural figure and as a literary mind.
Sometimes we read the lines of the green leaf, run our fingers over the smooth of the precious wood from our ancient trees. Sometimes, even in the sunset, puzzles as we look for the lines that propel the clouds, the color scheme with the multiple designs that the first artist put together. There are dancing in the streets again. The laughter of children rings through the house. On the seaside, the ruins recent from the later storms remind of ancestral wealth, pillage prolonged, pawned by an unthinking grandfather who lived the life of a lord and drove coming generations to despair and ruin.
But who says our time is up? That the box maker and the digger are in conference, or that the preachers have aired their robes, and the choir and the drummers are in rehearsal? No. Where the worm eats, a grain grows. The consultant deities have measured the time with long-winded arguments of eternity. And death, when he comes to the door with his own inimitable calling card, shall find a homestead, resurrected with laughter and dance, and the festival of the meat of the young lamb, and the red porridge of the new corn. We are the celebrants whose fields were overrun by rogues and other bad men who interrupted our dance with obscene songs and bad gestures. Someone said an alien fish swam up our lagoon, seeking a place to lay its load, in consonance with the original plan. Master, if you can be the oarsman for our boat, please do it. Do it. I asked you before, once upon a shore at home, where the seafront has narrowed to the brief space of childhood. We welcome the travelers. Come home on the new boat, fresh from the upright tree. Come home on the new boat, fresh from the upright tree.
He's a very deep thinker. You know, he was never really fond of all our gadgets, our tablets and the iPhones or whatnot. So he wouldn't type his work. He will write it. He will have somebody type it for him if he wants it to be typed.
In some ways, he was very traditional in certain aspects, and in certain aspects too, he was very contemporary and very forward-thinking, and I guess he found a way to make it work for him.
He said there's a connection between the thoughts in his mind to his hand holding the pen, putting the ideas on paper. That he does not get that connection if he's typing on a computer or with a typewriter. I understand what it means. It's deep, but then when you write, if you're a reporter, you're writing. Sometimes when you're writing it just flows. But when you're typing, then you pause. You have to think. Then it's like you're missing things. Then you have to finish and then readjust everything again. But then it's weird. But then when you're writing, and it just seems to flow. It's like a marriage. That works, and it's just flowing. So I guess that's what he meant. But he was right, in a way.
Through his writing, you're able to, I as a daughter who only knew him as a father, I'm able to see him as a man, as a creative mind, as somebody who pondered things deeply and who had a poetic and perhaps creative appreciation of life and his surroundings.
Remember the Christmas when on our way from Chelsea you fell on pavements, broke a tooth and I was mute? Your mother thought I was cruel, but your fall hurt me in that all of us, your clansmen, fell on alien ground.
I had no clue what it meant. Actually, I read it again at his funeral. I read it privately after the funeral, and I think I got a whole different meaning from it. And I was able to appreciate it better.
I think he drew a lot from history and what his father told him and his uncle and his relatives, what they told him, and what the culture and beliefs of the Anlo people and what he learned. And I think he drew a lot of inspiration from that.
He was always inspired. He was always writing stuff, you know. So I think the collection of issues is one of the books where he had written so many things, and I was like, okay, let me put it together. And that's why we actually went to Kenya. It was because of the book. You know, it was about to be released, and then we went there to be part of the conference as some sort of promotion for the book.
At the Storymoja Hay Festival and in Kenya in general, there's a real budding poetry movement. There's a lot of young poets. We find that there's a real hunger for poetry at the festival, and it's, you know, the events that really attract the biggest crowds, and people are very hungry for to meet poets and to look at new ways of exploring their craft. And what I found is that there was a sense of almost being stuck for a lot of the young poets at that point. And so when I got in touch with the African Poetry Book Fund, it was really to try and strike up a partnership to help provide opportunities for young poets to develop their own craft, but also look into publishing, to learn from young contemporary poets, and more importantly, to learn from some of our greats. And so Kwame Dawes, through the African Poetry Book Fund, then very, very, very generously organized for Professor Awoonor and Warsan Shire and himself to come down and conduct a series of poetry workshops, readings, and panel discussions at the Storymoja Festival.
We had gone for the opening ceremony for the Storymoja Festival, and he came in a little late and smiled at everyone. And afterwards, when I went up to say hello, immediately I said my name. You know, he said in Ga, "Oh, Jerry B, you know," and we all started laughing. So my first memory of him is laughter. I think because of the events that transpired in the next couple of days, every moment that I spent with him is etched in my memory because it gains that magnitude. I mean, he was very charismatic, very open, warm, and engaging person anyway. So any encounter with him would have been memorable regardless.
And we were very, very excited because we found, you know, it's very rare for young poets here to be able to interact with someone as prolific as Professor Awoonor. So it was very exciting indeed.
People who had just met, were there for like a few days before that thing happened. People who had met him, interacted with him. Everybody got a sense of guidance and direction and counseling from him, you know. Everybody was quiet, paying rapt attention. When it was time for questions, people were asking questions left, right. The organizers had to come and stop us because we had exceeded our time.
It was an unconventional but incredible and virtuoso performance, to be honest, because he lectured with no notes, and so he came in and just started to do his thing. And you could tell this is somebody who loves teaching, who's taught all his life, and if there's any one thing that he wouldn't have given up, I'd like to believe it would have been teaching.
Some of the things that were discussed, there were things where I've heard over the years, things he's harbored on over the years, and things, you know, we've discussed. But yeah, at that particular moment, I realized that yes, I mean, he's been talking a lot of sense, and people who didn't know him appreciated what he had to offer immediately. He
was already talking about the next book he's working on, which is a mark of his spirit, which is to constantly be doing new things. So the book that was being launched at the festival, yes, he was excited about it. Yes, he was there to promote it. But as a writer, his brain was already beyond that. He was working on new things, new ideas. And when we sat to talk, those were the things he was talking about, not the poems in the book that he'd come to support. My father and I guess people from his peers, you know, his genre, let me use that word, you know, they're cut from a different cloth. You know, they have a different understanding to life, you know, a different perspective of life. They see and understand things that we don't, you know, and then
typically they will frown on some of the things we do these days, as a youth or, coming up. And, as a child, of course, obviously, you make mistakes. You do things your father or your parents will not approve of. And they will want to put you in check. There are certain things we have spoken about, and there's a particular direction he wanted me to take, which I had put off for a while, and he wasn't too happy about it. But, as soon as the incident happened, it dawned on me like, look, you have to do what he's saying because he's right. He wrote a lot about death as a poet or a writer. And then in the lecture, some of the discussions were based on the fact of understanding who you are, where you're from. So somebody had asked the question, what should a writer look for, or what should a writer be inspired by? And one of his responses was, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, before you decide to write anything, is, what do you want to write about? Where are you from? What are the basis of the story you want to tell? What do you want to tell? And all that borders on your background. Somebody had also asked the question that when you read poems, you don't understand it. It's as if it's just all over the place. And then his response was, you're not supposed to read a poem like you're reading a storybook. You're supposed to, you either read it out loud or you have it read to you. It's like a song. So if you read it, if you're reading like you're reading regular, it will not make sense. It might be difficult to grasp, but once it's read to you, then you can visualize what is being said. Then it will come together. And I tried it, and yeah, it worked.
A humble, inquisitive writer, which is always the best kind of writer, which means that as much as he was a well-traveled, well-read, very erudite man who could speak on many subjects with authority, when you read his writing, there's a humility there, as though he is learning as he writes. And I think that is a quality that no writer should lose. It's a quality that I hope I have. I don't know that you can consciously borrow such a quality, but I try to approach my work with a humility and a curiosity. I think primarily when we're writers, there's something childlike about us in our encounter with the world, which is why we write, because at every moment there's something that's surprising us or telling us something, and then we want to respond to it. And because of that, I think one of the things that a child has is also a kind of quest for knowledge that never dies. And so I think if you're a writer, you need to keep that.
As soon as we arrived, the chaos started. So we were actually one of the first group of people to witness what was going on. So it wasn't about running a person near me. It was just about, there's something wrong. You need to find shelter. No. There was something my dad had said to me a couple of weeks before we even traveled. We were having a conversation, and he was talking about his time in prison. And he said that in any situation you find yourself in, you just need to adapt and survive. So I guess that was all that was on my mind. Just survive. Initially, I didn't know it was a terrorist attack. We didn't know what was going on. I thought it was an armed robbery. But then it quickly hit me that they are taking too long. Armed robbers wouldn't waste time. In a crowded place like that, they'll probably want to be in and out quickly. They wouldn't just shoot anybody in their way. So the next possible option was a terrorist attack. So it kind of hit me quickly.
Did you feel a sense of anger at that moment?
Yes. I felt a sense of anger when I found out my dad had passed.
I hadn't been there. As a traveler, I always try and go for the things that nobody else goes for. So I had been roaming in other places. I mean, I believe I would have gone with Prof because, he dragged me along. From the moment we met, it was as though we'd lost all these years, and so he took me along with himself and Apetsi to almost everything. After the lecture, they were going to go for lunch, and he said, you have to come, and I went, and lunch turned into dinner, And we ended up in someone's house talking, so it was that kind of encounter. So, but I was in a different hotel. So when they woke up in the morning to leave, I was somewhere else, and so I was going to meet them at the museum where the festival was.
My brother had SMS'd me that they had been involved in an incident at the mall, and he had been pinned down and needed some help. So, I knew about it, maybe an hour before it started showing up on the TV and being broadcasted worldwide. And so we have been in constant communication with him. I think at that particular point, our primary concern was really for the safety of my brother and my father. This kid had been pinned down in the kitchen of a restaurant with guys with guns, shooting people, and he still had the composure to still, send a text message, give us a location, tell us what was happening, and help other people coordinate around him. So he was definitely very brave in that particular moment. I think very few people would have been able to endure what he went through.
Actually, I was meant to read alongside Prof and Kwame Dawes, who's another writer that was with us. And obviously we heard about the attack and everything, and we hadn't heard from either Apeti or Prof. So we were just keeping in touch with the Ghanaian diplomatic services, who were very close and keeping us informed. But we didn't know what had happened, if he was injured. So we went ahead with the reading, but we were just waiting to hear. So it's after, when we came out of the reading, that the ambassador in Kenya called to let us know. Devastated. I also felt like I'd betrayed him by doing the reading, because at the time he was dead, and we thought perhaps he was missing. So we just wanted to make sure that the reading happened. I felt incredibly fortunate to have had that moment, because obviously he's been a huge influence in my writing life, and I've lived with his words, and I've lived with stories of him, because he was, I think, 10, 12 years older than my father. So my father had looked up to him and spoke about him quite a lot, and also my other uncle. So, I'd heard a lot about him, and but because of his diplomatic duties, he was rarely in the country, so I hadn't. So yeah, it was a huge blessing, and I feel fortunate because also the way in which he embraced me. And my father passed many years ago. It was almost like I had my father back for a short time. Well, the festival was curtailed, and we held a reading in his honor in the main auditorium.
Teju Cole said it best. He wrote an article for the New Yorker when he got to Nairobi and he found out that Kofi Awoonor was there, Kwame Dawes was there, Mongane Wale Serote. He sent a message to a fellow writer and friend abroad, and he said, "The old boys are here. We're very, very lucky." I'm just looking for his exact words. He said, he said, "These are senior African boys." And you could see how exciting it was to have this incredible space where you've got young and new, and you've got, the people who have charted the path, who opened the doors, and this incredible privilege to be around that. And to be around it intimately, to be able to have a workshop with somebody like Kofi Awoonor, where you're one of maybe 15 people, is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And the people who left that one workshop that he did, I don't think they'll ever forget it, really. He approached his craft very seriously, and he, at the workshop, a young writer wrote about how he almost foreshadowed. He said, "I'm not afraid of death. You would be an idiot if you thought that you would be able to escape death." And he said, "My ancestors take me everywhere I go." I'm paraphrasing. And it was almost eerie that he said that at that moment.
That the whole period has been in a moment of awakening. You know, I was alert. Let me say that I was alert. Yes, when family came, it helped. It made it easier to do it. But that whole period, I was alert. You know, it was a question of getting my dad home. You know, just getting home, and that was it. I was. It's tough. It was tough. It's still tough to deal with. He made me understand that he wasn't going to be there always. You know, and then he will go. And when he goes, there's certain things I need to do. You know, we need to take charge. We can't just be sitting around crying. We need to take charge. He will want us to take charge and continue. So at that particular moment, that was all I remembered. You know, I just had to take charge.
Losing a loved one is always a very difficult experience, and one that, you know, you probably come to terms with over time. But, you know, given the very public nature in which my father's demise came about, I think it'll be very hard to forget. You know, I still come across, I'm reminded about it every day when I meet people.
He had a lot of knowledge, which he want us to remember. You know, he had a love for humanity, a love for servitude to Mother Earth. You know, those are the kind of things he want us to remember him by. My dad wanted to be remembered by his works, his thoughts. He had a deep understanding of life. I always remember him as a funny dad. I mean, that's a given. I mean, my personal relationship with him will always stay. It's a part of me. It's always a part of me. There are things I do today that I think about like, I'm nothing like my dad now.
I think certainly it's a festival that would never ever be divorced from Prof's name, because first of all, he had a huge impact on almost everyone he met. So even before what happened, you know, I'd meet people and they'd say, oh wow, you know, we just spent 5 minutes with Kofi Awoonor and it felt like, you know, a whole new world opened up. So he had that effect on people. So I think there's certainly that, because, you know, by passing away, he also passes into myth, and so people talk about him. And Wole Soyinka, for instance, is at this year's festival because of what happened. Because the moment that happened, he said, I've been invited before, I never made it, but no terrorist is going to stop me from going, so I will come. I think I'd like him to be remembered the way that he wanted to be remembered. And that is already happening in the fact that as a writer, I've made reference to his work. That is the gift he's left us. That, you know, very often as a writer, you get into these arenas globally where people are talking about writing and they keep referring to European writers, and they expect you to do the same as though you have no heritage. Because of the work that people like Professor Kofi Awoonor did, I'm able to look back and say, actually, you know, this is inspired by Professor Kofi Awoonor, by Atukwe Okai. And then if they don't know, I say, well, you go and find out, because I have a history, and that's what he left us. And I think that's the best way to remember him. I think there's a sureness of who they are, which the younger writers don't have. And I think that's due to two things. One of them is that they are a transition generation, which is they were the guys who were taken from the villages straight into boarding school. So they understood the village life, the gossip, the colloquialisms, you know, all the proverbs, all of that stuff. And then they took on this Western education. Now, if they were wise enough not to forget everything they had known before, and they had these two things, then they were some of the most powerful people on earth, because they're hybrid. They have an understanding of at least two cultures. Because you have to remember, Professor Kofi Awoonor, my father, etc., are people who may have come from one village and then grown up. So, I mean, Prof spoke Ga perfectly, spoke Ewe, spoke Fanti. So his accessibility in terms of people being able to talk to him and the stories that he can access from people, and also his access into other cultures was incredible, just within Ghana itself. And then beyond that, he spoke French. So, you know, all of these things come together to make the kind of writer who, when they're writing, everything comes with a context that is global as well as local. And that kind of thing you can't teach. Unfortunately, I think after Kwame Nkrumah's overthrow, there's a dearth in the culture industry in this country. So a whole generation of writers were robbed of the cultural grounding that this generation had. And so there's so many writers trying to find themselves that perhaps haven't gone about it the right way or haven't gone back to read because they thought, well, these people are old-fashioned, I don't want to, or they want to take their lead from somewhere else. That is, the tragedy of our generation is also our choice, the amount of choice we have, the fact that there's millions of books as compared to thousands of books. And so people don't know where to turn.
He taught me many lessons, but I tell you what, he taught me to always carry a handkerchief because we sweat too much. And yes, that's one of the things I remember. There are so many lessons, just to be yourself and to be direct and straightforward. I want him to be remembered as somebody who deeply loved this nation, not just his people, but he loved Ghana as a whole, who deeply had very strong views about what should be happening. And I would refer you to a small book that he wrote back in the perhaps late 60s or 70s called Come Back Ghana. And in that book he outlined what he felt should be happening in different sectors.
I guess for anyone like him, of his stature, I guess, you know, to honor the person is really to make sure that their legacy lives on and they are not forgotten. And so I think that's, you know, if that happens, I think he'll be on it. So long as we don't forget him and we don't forget what he's done for the country, what he's done for Ghana, what he's done for his people, and his contributions to society at large, and I think that'd be a good honor. Sometimes the pain and sorrow return, particularly at night. I will grieve again and again tomorrow, for the memory of a death foretold. I grieve again tomorrow, cauliflower across the yard, listen to the birds in the tree. I grieve again tomorrow, for a pain that grows on a pain, a friend of my solitude, in a bed long emptied by choice. I grieve again this grievance, immemorial, for this pain, this load under which I wreath and grave. Yesterday, I could not go for my obligatory walk.
Instead, I used the hour to recall the lanes,
the birds,
the occasional snarling dogs, the brown sheep in a penned field,
the dwarf mango tree heavy
with fruit,
the Martian palms tall and erect,
the century pine swaying in a distant field. I believe in the possibility of freedom, in the coming of the bees in summer, in mild winters and furious hurricanes. I believe in the arrival of American tornadoes before I go to hunt on the island of youth, where I smelt the heady smell of the wild guinea fowl and heard her chuckle for her child in the opening light of an April day. I believe in hope and the future of hope, in victory before death, collective, inexorable, obligatory, in the enduring prospect of love, though the bed is empty, in the child's happiness, though the meal is meager. I believe in light and day, beyond the tomb, far from the solitude of the womb and the mystical might, in the coming of fruits, the striped salmon and the crooked crab,